She had 72 hours to change the world. Instead, someone gave her 72 seconds before everything went dark. Vanessa Ashcroft was 30 years old, standing at the edge of history, when the lights died and armed men stepped out of the shadows inside her own building. The people she trusted most had already sold her out, and the only person who stayed, the only one who didn't run, was a janitor with a mop bucket and eyes that had seen things no maintenance worker should ever know. What happened next inside Ashcroft Tower would shock an entire industry, and it started with one man who refused to leave her behind. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Smash the like button if you're already hooked, and drop a comment right now telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning Vanessa Ashcroft was supposed to change everything started the way most important mornings do. Badly. Her alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was set, because her phone had decided to update itself overnight and scramble half her settings in the process. She lay there in the dark of her penthouse apartment staring at the ceiling for a moment, that specific kind of stillness that comes right before something enormous, like the second before a wave breaks. Then she got up, made coffee she barely tasted, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city below her, still deciding whether to wake up. 30 years old, CEO of Ashcroft Technologies for 14 months. And today was the day she was going to show the world what the last 3 years of grinding, bleeding, and quietly refusing to quit had actually built. ARIA, Adaptive Responsive Intelligence Architecture, a processing system so fundamentally different from anything currently on the market that the first time she'd explained it to the board, two of them had laughed. Not cruelly, just the way people laugh when something sounds too good to be honest. She didn't argue with them. She let the prototype do the talking, and after 20 minutes of demonstration, neither of those men was laughing anymore. The launch was scheduled for 2 p.m. press conference, live demonstration, global feed. 14 years of her father's foundational research, 3 years of her own obsessive refinement, and roughly 460 employees whose paychecks depended on this going right. No pressure. She dressed in the dark, charcoal blazer, black slacks, the kind of outfit that was supposed to say, I am in control of this situation, and was in the back of her car by 6:15, going over notes she already knew by heart. Ashcroft Tower occupied the northeast corner of the financial district, 43 floors of glass and steel that her father had broken ground on 12 years ago and never lived to see completed. Vanessa had finished it. She finished most things her father started, which was either admirable or a sign of something a therapist would have opinions about. She'd stopped going to therapy 2 years ago, mostly because she kept canceling appointments, and eventually the therapist stopped rescheduling. The building's lobby was already humming when she arrived. Security had been doubled. Her head of operations, Marcus Webb, had insisted on it weeks ago when they started getting vague reports about corporate intelligence gathering from a competitor. Vanessa had signed off on the extra personnel without asking too many questions. That was a mistake she'd realize later. She rode the elevator to the 38th floor, nodded to her assistant Priya, declined the offered breakfast because her stomach was doing something unpleasant, and walked into the executive suite to start the final pre-launch review. 8 people around the conference table. People she'd worked with closely for over a year. People she'd trusted with the technical specifications, the timeline, the security architecture around ARIA's core code. She looked at their faces and felt nothing unusual. That was the thing about betrayal. It almost never arrives wearing a sign. The first anomaly showed up at 11:40. Priya knocked on the glass of the conference room where Vanessa was doing a final run-through with her chief engineer, a compact, intense woman named Dara Ewan, who communicated primarily in technical shorthand and mild profanity. Excuse me, there's a system flag from building security, something on the network monitoring side. Vanessa looked up. What kind of flag? They're saying it might be a false positive, unusual data packet activity in the sub-basement server room. Dara's head came up fast. Sub-basement? That's where the primary area interface connects to the… Get me Webb, Vanessa said. She didn't wait for Webb to come to her. She walked to the security hub on the 36th floor herself, with Dara 2 steps behind her and Priya scrambling to keep up. Webb was standing over a technician's shoulder when she arrived, his expression doing the thing faces do when someone is trying hard to look unconcerned. Marcus, talk to me. It's probably nothing. A diagnostic glitch. We're running checks. You doubled security 3 weeks ago over vague reports, and now there's unusual activity in my server room 2 hours before launch, and you're telling me it's probably nothing? Webb's jaw tightened slightly. We're running checks, Vanessa. She held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, then turned to the technician at the console. Show me the packet data. The technician looked at Webb. Webb gave a small nod. The data came up on screen, and Dara leaned in, and within about 4 seconds, the quiet engineer said a word that Priya pretended not to hear. That's not a diagnostic glitch, Dara said flatly. Someone is mirroring our server right now, live. Vanessa turned back to Webb. His face had gone carefully neutral, which was somehow worse than if he'd looked alarmed. Marcus, she said quietly. Who has access to the sub-basement? Executive clearance and maintenance, he paused, and building security. The light went out. Not just dimmed, not a flicker. Every light on the floor, every light in the building, as she'd learn later, cut out simultaneously, and the emergency backup systems that should have activated in under 3 seconds didn't. The room dropped into the kind of dark that doesn't exist much anymore in the middle of a city, in the middle of the day. Blackout curtains had engaged automatically on the external windows, a security feature designed to prevent aerial photography during sensitive operations. Someone had turned it into a trap. Vanessa heard movement in the dark, not panicked scrambling, deliberate movement, tactical. Dara, here. Dara's voice right beside her, tight with something close to fear. Priya was somewhere behind her. She could hear breathing. Webb was not. She couldn't feel him in the space anymore, and her brain filed that information away in a cold, clinical corner. Then the shouting started from the stairwell, 1 floor up, cascading down, and the sound of boots, and something that was not a building security voice barking orders in a language she recognized as English, but the cadence was wrong, clipped, coordinated, the way people talk when they've rehearsed what comes next. People began running, not toward the exits, just running, the directionless panic of civilians in a space that has suddenly become somewhere else entirely. Vanessa stood still. It wasn't courage exactly, she just didn't know which way to go, and she'd learned years ago that moving randomly in a crisis almost always made things worse. A hand closed around her arm, firm, not rough, and she nearly swung her elbow back before a voice said, quietly and close to her ear, "Don't. I know where the exits are." It was not a voice she recognized from her executive team. She couldn't see him in the dark. She registered height, the smell of industrial cleaner, the faint squeak of utility boots on the polished floor. Her brain produced an image, the maintenance worker she'd passed twice in the last week, once near the service elevator on 38, once in the corridor outside the server room. Medium build, quiet. The kind of person who occupies space so efficiently that most people's eyes just slide past him. "Who are you?" she said. "Building maintenance," he said. "Ethan Carter." "Why aren't you running?" A pause, genuine consideration of the question, which was somehow more unnerving than an immediate answer. "Not yet a good time for that," he said. "There are 4 of them on the stairwell to your left, 2 more by the main elevator bank. They're moving in a pattern, which means they're looking for something specific." Another pause. "Or someone." Vanessa felt the cold drop through her chest. "Me, would be my guess. You're a janitor." "Yeah. No defensiveness in it, just the fact. You want to talk about that right now, or you want to move?" He moved like he had a map inside his head that nobody else was given access to. Not fast. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't rush, didn't scramble, and in that terrible dark with the sounds of boots and shouting echoing down from above, his refusal to hurry was the most terrifying and reassuring thing she'd ever experienced. He moved with purpose, which is a different thing entirely from moving with speed. He took her through a maintenance door she'd walked past dozens of times and registered as a utility closet. It was not a utility closet. Behind it was a corridor, barely shoulder width, that smelled like concrete dust and old electrical wiring. He had a flashlight, a small, high-quality one from his belt, clicked on without fumbling, and he held it low, illuminating just enough. Dara was still with them. She'd followed without being asked, which told Vanessa something about Dara's instincts. Priya had gone with the evacuating crowd, which Vanessa would have to trust was the safer option. "Where does this go?" Vanessa asked. "Sub-basement," Ethan said, "and then out. There's a server room in the sub-basement. Someone is currently mirroring my company's core systems from it." He stopped walking. She couldn't see his face clearly in the low light, but she saw his head turn toward her, the slight adjustment of his posture. "Say that again." "Our network monitor flagged an active data mirror. Whoever is in this building right now, they're not just here to cause disruption. They're copying area." "How long does a mirror like that take?" "Dara?" Vanessa said. "At the transfer rate we saw?" Dara's voice from behind them. 90 minutes, maybe less with the right hardware." Ethan was quiet for a second. Then, "How long ago did the flag come up?" "About 20 minutes before the blackout," Vanessa said. "So they've been running for roughly 25 minutes. He did something with the calculation that she couldn't read. We have time, but not a lot of it. There'll be someone guarding the room." "How do you know there'll be someone guarding the room?" Vanessa said. "Because that's what I'd do," he said, and then started walking again before she could ask the follow-up question. The sub-basement of Ashcroft Tower existed in a kind of institutional forgetting. It was on the blueprints, obviously, but it was the kind of space that executives don't visit and administrators don't tour. Raw concrete where the upper floors had marble, pipe runs and conduit bundles, and the deep, constant vibration of the building's mechanical systems. Emergency lighting here had actually activated, dim red strips along the floor, which meant someone had deliberately cut power only to the occupied floors. More planning, more precision. Vanessa was revising her understanding of what was happening in real time. This wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't desperate. This had been built over weeks or months, fitted into the architecture of her company, like a thing designed to look like it belonged. The server room was ahead of them, behind a heavy steel door with a keycard reader that was currently dark. No power to the lock. But the door was cracked open. Ethan stopped them with a gesture, palm back, flat, the kind of signal that works even when you've never been taught it, because the meaning is animal and old. They stopped. He listened. Vanessa listened too. One set of footsteps inside. Moving in a short pattern. Pacing or checking equipment. One person. Ethan handed her the flashlight. He held her eyes for a moment, and she noticed, for the first time, that his were the eyes of someone who had done things she was never going to ask about directly. Not dangerous eyes, not cruel eyes, just eyes that had seen a particular category of things and had learned to keep that knowledge separate from the rest of living. "Stay here," he said, "both of you." "That's my server room," Vanessa said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Stay here." I was gone through the cracked door before she could argue, and what followed was brief, nearly silent, and nothing like what she'd seen in movies. There was a short sound of impact, once, then a second time, and then nothing. 30 seconds, maybe less. Ethan appeared back in the doorway. There was a small cut on his jaw from something she hadn't heard happen. "Clear," he said. Inside, on the floor near the server rack, a man she didn't recognize was zip-tied at the wrists with his own equipment cable, breathing, conscious, and not speaking. On the server rack, a device she'd never authorized, matte black, the size of a paperback novel, was running its quiet theft. Dara crossed to it immediately. "I can kill the transfer." "Do it," Vanessa said. The device went dark. 23% copied, the screen read, before Dara pulled the connection. Not enough to reconstruct area. Maybe not enough to do anything with it all. Vanessa looked at the man on the floor, then at Ethan, who was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone counting exits. "They're going to know the transfer failed," he said. "Yes." "Which means they're going to move on, whatever the backup plan is." He looked at her. "You need to get the real evidence out of this building, not the data. Proof. Documents, communications, whatever ties the people upstairs to this operation." "How do you know there are documents?" "Because whoever planned this was careful enough to run a two-stage operation and patient enough to spend months building access," he said. "Careful people leave paper trails by accident, and they usually have evidence on each other as insurance." He paused. "I'm guessing they didn't expect the transfer to fail." Vanessa stared at him for a moment. The maintenance uniform, the small cut on his jaw, the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who knows what they're doing and doesn't feel the need to explain it to you right now. Ethan Carter, she said. Yeah. You're not just a janitor. He looked at her without any particular expression. Right now, I'm whoever's useful, he said. What's on 32? She blinked. That's where our legal and compliance archive is. Physical files. Print records of every executive communication for the last 4 years. Then that's where we're going, he said, and picked up the flashlight and started moving. Behind her, in the red-lit sub-basement of a building gone suddenly hostile, she heard Dara exhale once, sharp and controlled. Vanessa followed. She didn't run. Neither did he. They moved like they had a plan, which was close enough for now to the same thing. The stairwell between sub-basement and floor 32 was 11 flights, and they took all of them without speaking. That was the thing Vanessa noticed first about moving with Ethan Carter. He didn't feel silence the way most people did under pressure. Most people, when they were scared and didn't know what was coming next, talked. They explained themselves, narrated their own thinking, asked questions they didn't actually need answered right then. It was a reflex, the way the body tries to make noise to prove it's still alive. Ethan didn't do that. He moved, he listened, and when he had something worth saying, he said it. Everything else he kept somewhere interior, behind a face that was neither cold nor warm, but simply present. Vanessa was used to reading people. It was, arguably, the single skill that had gotten her further than any technical knowledge or business instinct. The ability to sit across from someone and understand, within a few minutes, what they actually wanted versus what they were saying they wanted. She was good at it. She'd been good at it since she was 11 years old and started figuring out which of her father's business partners were honest and which ones were performing honesty. Ethan Carter, she could not read. And that bothered her more than she wanted to admit while climbing 11 flights of stairs in the dark. He stopped them twice on the way up. Once at the 4th floor landing, pressing them flat against the wall while footsteps passed on the other side of the stairwell door. 2 sets, moving fast, coordinated. Once at the 9th floor for reasons she couldn't immediately identify, until she realized he'd heard something coming from above and was calculating. Both times he waited. Both times he was right. When they reached the 32nd floor and he eased the door open a careful inch and looked through, she stood behind him and became aware, in a way she hadn't been in the sub-basement's emergency lighting, of the specific quality of stillness he carried, like something that had been wound very tight a long time ago and had learned, over years, to carry the tension so constantly it no longer showed. Clear, he said, and pushed the door open. Dara, who had climbed 11 flights without complaint, and whose breathing had returned almost to normal by the time they reached the top, said quietly, "Your cut's bleeding again." He touched his jaw with the back of his hand, looked at what came away. "Not important. I have a bandage in my—" "Later," he said, and was already moving down the corridor toward the compliance archive. Dara looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked back and had nothing to offer. They followed him. The Ashcroft Technologies Compliance Archive was, by any standard, an ugly room. Floor-to-ceiling metal shelving, file boxes arranged by year and department, 2 folding tables in the center where documents could be reviewed. It smelled like paper, and the particular staleness of air that doesn't move much. Vanessa had been in it exactly 3 times in 14 months as CEO, which she was beginning to regret. The room had its own backup power. A battery unit, grandfathered in from a building code requirement years ago, and the fluorescent lights came up fully when Ethan found the wall switch. After the red dim of the sub-basement and the darkness of the stairwell, the flat white light felt almost aggressive. 4 years of executive communications, Vanessa said, scanning the shelves. What are we looking for specifically? Anything that connects the people upstairs to outside parties, Ethan said. He was moving along the shelves already, reading labels without touching. Specifically look for anything that came in from outside the company, correspondence, proposals, anything that feels like it's trying too hard to be casual. That's a broad search parameter. Yeah. He pulled a file box from the shelf, 2022, External Partnerships, and set it on the table. Start with the year before you took over. Whoever built this operation had to start building it before you were in charge. They needed time. Vanessa stood still for a moment, because that landed in a way she wasn't quite ready for. before she was in charge, while her father was still alive, or just after. While the company was in transition and vulnerable, and everyone was watching the new CEO try to find her footing, she pulled a box herself and started going through it. Dara had found a working outlet and was doing something on her phone, which Vanessa registered as useful without knowing yet what it was. The three of them worked in silence for a few minutes. Outside, somewhere above them, she could still occasionally hear movement. The building wasn't quiet. It was never fully quiet, but the sounds had changed character. Less panic, more controlled searching. Whoever was running this operation had moved past the chaos phase and into the systematic phase, which was, in some ways, more frightening. "Here," Ethan said. He said it the way people say it when they found what they were half expecting but were hoping not to. Vanessa crossed to him. In his hands was a thin folder, the kind that gets filed at the back of a box like someone wanted it accessible but not obvious. Inside, a letter, printed on unmarked paper, no letterhead. 4 paragraphs. The language was the kind that people use when they want communication to be deniable, vague enough to mean nothing to a stranger, specific enough that everyone involved knows exactly what it means. She read it twice. "That's Raymond Holt's signature," she said. Raymond Holt, Chief Operating Officer. 11 years with the company, 4 of them under her father, 7 under a rotating sequence of interim leadership during the transition years. The man who had shaken her hand at her first board meeting and said, with apparent sincerity, that he was glad the company was finally going to have real leadership again. "You know him well?" Ethan said. "Well enough." Her voice came out flat, not by choice. "He was the one who helped me get board approval for the area development timeline. He argued for it." She paused. "I thought he believed in it." "Maybe he did," Ethan said. "Doesn't mean he wasn't also taking meetings on the side." She looked at the signature again. There was something almost unbearable about holding a piece of paper that explained in its careful, vague language why 14 months of her life had been pointed at this specific trap. She set the folder on the table. "How many more boxes?" she said. "A lot," Ethan said. "We can't take all of it. We need to be selective and we need to move in the next—" He checked his watch, an old one, analog, nothing smart about it. 10 minutes. They'll sweep the compliance levels eventually. "What's our exit?" "Service elevator goes to the parking structure. From there, on foot to the adjacent building's lobby. There's a maintenance tunnel connection that most people don't know exists." He paused. "I know it." "Of course you do," Dara said from the corner, in a tone that wasn't quite sarcasm, but was in the neighborhood. Ethan looked at her briefly. She looked back at him over the top of her phone screen. Something passed between them that wasn't unfriendly, more like mutual acknowledgement of a shared, exhausted absurdity. "I need 30 seconds with the building schematic in my head before we pull any more files," he said to Vanessa. "Tell me about Marcus Webb." She felt it again, that cold, settling thing. "What about him?" "He had access to the security configuration. He recommended the increased personnel, which means he controlled who those personnel were. And he was in the room when the blackout hit, and I haven't heard you mention him since." Ethan's voice was factual, not accusing, just laying it out. "He's either a hostage, which is possible, or he was a door they walked through." "He's been with the company 8 years, Vanessa said. "Doesn't matter." "I know it doesn't matter." She said it more sharply than she intended. She picked up another folder and opened it. 8 years. He brought me coffee on my first day. He told me... She stopped, closed the folder, set it down, picked up a different one. "He told me my father would have been proud of what I was doing with the company." Ethan said nothing, which was, she was learning, his version of acknowledging something that didn't have a useful response. "Webb's in with them," she said after a moment. "I know it. I've known it since he was standing there looking unconcerned at the security console and doing nothing that actually helped." She pulled 3 more folders from the box. "I just needed a minute." "Okay," he said, and went back to the files. They found 9 more documents in the next 7 minutes, 2 more from Holt, 4 from a board member named Carla Reeves, who Vanessa had appointed to the Finance Oversight Committee herself, and 3 from an external party identified only by a company name, Meridian Strategic Group. Meridian. She knew the name, peripherally. The kind of company that shows up at industry conferences with a booth and a vague mission statement, and representatives who always seem to know slightly more about your internal operations than they should. A consulting firm, supposedly. The kind that could be many things underneath the word consulting. Dara had looked it up. They have 11 employees on their public-facing website, Dara said, and a client list that doesn't name anyone, which for a consulting firm is either very discreet or very not what they say they are. Competitor-backed, Vanessa said, or an independent operator that sells to whoever's buying. Dara set her phone down. Arya's tech is worth a lot to a lot of people. We don't have to go far down the list of who'd want it. Ethan had built a stack of the most relevant documents, not large, maybe 40 pages total, and was folding them into a battered utility bag he'd pulled from somewhere on his person. It was the kind of bag maintenance workers carry because it has 100 small pockets that accumulate tools over time. He was reorganizing the pockets with the focused efficiency of someone who thought in systems. "Where does your legal team keep emergency contacts?" he said. "I have a number," Vanessa said. "Corporate counsel. But if they've compromised the executive floor, I don't know who." "Not your counsel. Outside. Someone not connected to the company," she thought. "My father's attorney. He handled the estate. He's still on retainer for a few personal matters. He's not involved in the company's legal operations at all." "That's who you call. When we're out?" He zipped the bag. "Not police yet, not FBI. One person who's not on anyone's radar." "You sound like you know how this goes," Vanessa said. He looked at her, and there was something briefly visible in his face. Not quite discomfort, but the closest he'd come to it. "I know how things go wrong when you call the wrong people too fast," he said. "That's all." She let it go. Barely. The service elevator was old, freight-rated, and slow. They stood inside it without speaking as it descended, and Vanessa was aware of the strange, suspended quality of the moment, the way extreme circumstances sometimes produce this pocket of almost ordinary feeling. 3 people in an elevator, carrying stolen documents, running from something that had been hunting them since before any of them knew it was hunting. Outside the elevator doors, a building full of armed people and hidden collaborators. Below them, a parking structure and a maintenance tunnel, and, hopefully, a way out. And in the middle of it, her own mind doing the small, terrible thing it kept doing, which was running a background calculation on who else might be involved. Which face, over the last 14 months, had been a performance? Which congratulations had been genuine, and which had been cover? It was the kind of thinking that could hollow you out if you let it run long enough, and she was aware of that, and she let it run anyway, because not knowing felt worse. The elevator stopped at B2. Ethan held his arm out before she could move, and she stopped. He listened. 15 seconds of his particular quality of listening, which was a full-body thing, not just ears, the slight tilt of weight forward that she was beginning to recognize. 2 people, he said quietly. Parking structure, north side. They're not moving. Guarding the exit? Or the vehicles? Same difference. He thought for a moment. The tunnel access is south side. We go along the east wall, stay in the vehicle shadow. You stay low and you don't hesitate. If I say move, you move. If I say stop, you stop immediately. No questions in the moment. And if something goes wrong, Dara said, define wrong. If we get separated. He reached into the utility bag and wrote something on the back of a maintenance tag with a pen from his pocket. A number, a name. That's my phone number and the name of the attorney you should contact if I'm not with you. He gave it to Dara. Same as the one Vanessa is calling. Get the documents to him, get somewhere public, call 911 from a working phone. Dara took the tag, looked at it. You've thought about getting separated. I think about everything getting worse, he said, without particular drama. It's a habit. He pushed the elevator door open. The B2 parking level of Ashcroft Tower held roughly 200 vehicles on any given workday, and in the emergency shutdown, they sat in the dim of battery-fed floor lighting, shadows long, and the kind of silence that parking structures have that's different from other silences, slightly echoey, slightly damp, everything a little louder than it should be. They moved along the east wall the way he'd said, low and in the vehicle shadow, and Vanessa was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she rarely was. Not because she was scared, or not only because of that, but because the body in genuine danger produces a kind of clarity that nothing else quite replicates. Everything sharp, everything exactly what it was. She could see the two figures on the north side, partially visible between parked vehicles. One of them was on a radio, the other was watching the elevator bank. Neither of them was looking south. 30 meters to the tunnel access door, 25, 20. Her heel came down on something, a piece of gravel, a small piece of debris, barely anything. And the sound it made in the concrete space was, to her ears, enormous. She felt Ethan's hand close around her arm, steadying, and she went absolutely still. The figure on the radio paused, looked toward their direction. Vanessa did not breathe. The figure turned back, said something into the radio, kept walking his slow, repetitive path along the north wall. Ethan released her arm. They kept moving. The tunnel access door was heavy, metal, with a push bar. No keycard, mechanical only, grandfathered in like the archive's battery backup, remnant of an older building code. Ethan pushed it slowly, controlling the speed so the hinges didn't protest, and they slipped through into the tunnel one at a time, and the door closed behind them with a sound that seemed, after the parking structure, almost quiet. The tunnel was exactly what it was. A maintenance connection between structures, low ceiling, conduit and pipe on both walls, concrete underfoot. Single work light strip along the center of the ceiling, half of the bulbs burned out. It smelled like damp concrete and machine oil. Dara exhaled. A long, controlled breath. Vanessa realized she'd been holding her own breath for roughly the last 3 minutes. "How far?" she said. 200 meters, Ethan said. "Opens into the sub-basement of the Harlan building next door. From there, the emergency stairwell goes to street level." They walked. The tunnel was straight, no branches, no decisions. After the last 30 minutes of constant decision points and threat calculations, the simplicity of it felt almost disorienting. "Ethan," Vanessa said. She kept her voice low. The tunnel carried sound differently than open spaces. "Yeah. The way you moved back there, the sub-basement, the parking structure, the way you talked about the security perimeter." She watched his profile in the failing work light, the careful way he set each foot down. "You know how to do things that maintenance workers don't know how to do." Silence for a moment. The sound of their footsteps, 3 different rhythms. "People learn things," he said. "Not like that." More silence. He didn't fill it, which she'd expected. She waited him out. "I did other work before this," he said finally. "A long time ago." "What kind of work?" He glanced at her and she saw the brief consideration happening behind his eyes. Not evasiveness, more like he was deciding how much of a thing to say and which version of it was accurate without being unnecessary. "The kind," he said slowly, "where they send you somewhere complicated and expect you to make it less complicated, usually with limited information and limited support and a timeline that was never realistic from the beginning." "Military," she said. He didn't confirm it, but something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way something shifts when you're named correctly and you've decided not to argue with the name. "How long have you been at Ashcroft Tower?" she said. 8 months? She processed that. 8 months. Just long enough to learn every maintenance tunnel, every service corridor, every backup system and mechanical access point. Just long enough to understand the building's full architecture the way only someone who works inside it every day would. "Why?" she said. "Why maintenance? After whatever you did before?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "My daughter," he said. "She's 7. Her name's Maya." Another pause. "When I was doing the other work, I wasn't around. At all. And then I was around all the time because I left the other work, and I realized I didn't know how to be around. How to be just present for someone small." A short exhale, not quite a laugh. "Maintenance work. You know what you're doing each day. You know when it's done. You go home at a fixed hour." He paused. "She likes to know when I'm coming home." Vanessa didn't say anything for a moment. The tunnel stretched ahead of them, and the Harlan building access door was visible now, a rectangle of slightly less dark at the far end. "She's safe right now?" Vanessa said. "School," he said. "She gets out at 3:15. He checked his watch, the old analog one. "We have time." "We have time," said with the flat practicality of a man who has learned to hold multiple things simultaneously, the crisis in front of him and the 7-year-old he has to be home for, without letting either one collapse the other. Dara, who had been quiet for a while, said from behind them, "For what it's worth, I also have 11 years of documents on my phone that I photographed while you two were going through the boxes." A pause. "I didn't mention it earlier because I didn't want to slow us down. But we have a digital backup." Ethan stopped walking, turned to look at her. "When?" Vanessa said. "When you were having the conversation about Webb." Dara's expression was, as always, hard to read in low light, but her voice carried a particular dry steadiness. "I'm a systems engineer. Photographing documents is well within my skill set." "That's—" Vanessa started. "I know," Dara said. Ethan looked at Dara for a moment with an expression that was possibly the closest he'd come to genuine surprise since the blackout, and then he said, "Good," and turned back toward the door. They were 15 feet from it when Vanessa's phone, which she'd thought was dead, lost signal. The network had been down since the blackout. Buzzed. A text. Unknown number. 3 words. "We know you're moving." She stopped. Ethan was already reading it over her shoulder, and she felt him go very still. "That's not possible," she said. "No one knew we were—" "Someone in this building is tracking your phone," he said. "Not the network. Bluetooth, NFC proximity, something they set up in advance. They don't have GPS. If they had GPS, they'd already know exactly where we are." He looked at the phone. "They know you left the building's main floors. They're narrowing. What do we do?" He took the phone from her hand, gently, not roughly, and set it on the tunnel floor against the wall. "You leave it," he said. "Your attorney. You're going to call him from a different phone when we get to street level." "That's evidence. It's a tracking device right now," he said. "And they already know it's here. Leaving it moving is better than leaving it still." He thought for a second. "Dara's phone." "I have a privacy screen and I've been on airplane mode since the blackout," Dara said. "The photo's never connected to any network. Keep it that way until we're 2 blocks from here." He looked at them both. "We go now. Fast." He pushed the access door open, and they went through, and Vanessa did not look back at her phone lying on the tunnel floor, pinging its location to people who wanted her quiet, sending them her last known coordinates like a small, stubborn piece of bait. The Harlan Building's sub-basement was warmer than the tunnel, and the emergency stairwell was lit and empty and smelled like old paint, and they climbed it without stopping, and the street door opened onto a loading alley between buildings where mid-afternoon traffic noise hit them like a wall of sound after the silence of the inside. Daylight. People. The specific chaos of a city that didn't know anything had happened. Ethan scanned the alley in both directions. Once, quick, the automatic sweep of someone who's never fully stopped doing it, and said, "Walk north. Don't stop. We get to the corner coffee shop 2 blocks up, and we make the call from there." "And then," Vanessa said, "and then we figure out what we have and what we can prove, and who we hand it to that we actually trust." He started walking. "One thing at a time." She fell into step beside him, and behind them Dara held her phone against her chest like it was the thing most worth protecting, which, at this particular moment in this particular situation, it very nearly was. Somewhere behind them, in a tunnel under the city, her old phone was still sending out its little signal, and whoever was reading it was about to discover that the person they were tracking was no longer attached to it. Vanessa didn't find that as satisfying as she'd expected. What she found instead was a kind of anger she hadn't quite located before, something with actual weight to it, the specific anger of someone who has worked for years inside a structure only to discover the structure itself had been working against her the whole time. She carried it the way you carry something heavy, not comfortably, but with the understanding that putting it down was not currently an option. The coffee shop was 2 blocks north, warm light in its windows against the afternoon. People inside living what felt from the outside like extraordinary, ordinary lives. She pushed the door open and the bell above it rang, and a barista looked up and said, "What can I get you?" And Vanessa stood there for a half-second in the gap between what she'd just come from and where she now was. "Do you have a phone I could borrow?" she said. "It's urgent." The barista, young, slightly puzzled, the face of someone who's been asked strange things before, looked at the landline on the back counter and said, "Yeah, sure." Vanessa nodded, crossed to the counter. Ethan stood near the door, watching the street, doing what she was beginning to understand was his permanent and involuntary job, which was watching whatever was coming and calculating how much time they had before it arrived. She dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. "Wallace Mercer," said a voice she recognized, her father's attorney, a man she hadn't spoken to in 4 months. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "it's Vanessa Ashcroft. I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you not to call anyone until I'm finished talking." A pause on the line. Then, in the measured voice of a man who had handled difficult situations for difficult people for 30 years, "I'm listening." She started at the beginning because there was no useful place in the middle to start, and Ethan stayed at the door and watched the street, and outside the afternoon continued its business of being ordinary, unaware of what was moving underneath it. Wallace Mercer listened for 11 minutes without interrupting, which was either a sign of professional discipline or genuine alarm, and Vanessa suspected it was both. When she finished, there was a silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone organizing a great deal of it into the correct order. "The documents," he said. "Physical and digital copies, both intact?" "Yes." "And you are currently off-site, out of the building?" "Yes." "And the individual who helped you, this Ethan Carter, he's with you now?" She looked across the coffee shop to where Ethan was standing near the window, still watching the street with that quality of attention that looked, to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at, like a man simply waiting for someone. "Yes," she said. "All right." Another pause, shorter. "I'm going to make 2 calls, Vanessa. The first is to a federal contact, not local law enforcement. Federal, someone I trust personally, not institutionally. The second is to a securities attorney I know who's handled corporate fraud cases at this scale before. You will not call anyone else. Not your board, not your investors, not any member of your executive team until we know the full scope of who's involved." His voice was measured, careful. The voice of someone who has learned that the first 20 minutes of a crisis determines most of what comes after. "Where will you be in 1 hour?" She looked at Ethan again. He had turned from the window and was looking at her, and she held up one finger. 1 minute, and he gave the smallest nod. "I'll call you back in 15 minutes with a location," she said. "Good. Vanessa." A pause. "Your father built something worth protecting. You've been doing that. Keep doing it for another hour." She handed the phone back to the barista, who had been very professionally pretending to reorganize the pastry case for the last 11 minutes. "Thank you," Vanessa said. "No problem," the barista said, in the voice of someone who had several questions and was choosing not to ask any of them. Vanessa crossed to where Ethan stood. Dara was at a corner table, phone face down, a cup of something in front of her that she wasn't drinking. "Mercer's making contact," Vanessa said quietly. "Federal level. He has someone he trusts." Ethan nodded slowly. He'd been thinking about something while she was on the phone. She could tell, the way his eyes had a slightly inward quality, working through something she hadn't been part of. "What?" she said. "The text you got in the tunnel. We know you're moving." He said it carefully, like he was turning it over. "That wasn't a threat. It was information. Someone told you they knew, when the useful thing, if they wanted to stop you, would have been not to tell you." Vanessa considered this. "You think someone inside is signaling us?" "Maybe. Or they made a mistake under pressure and let something slip to someone who forwarded it." He paused. "Or it's psychological. Try to make you run faster, make mistakes." "Which do you think it is?" He looked at her for a moment. "I think it doesn't matter right now because we can't act on any of those options until we know more." A beat. "I think the thing that matters is that they know you're off-site and they know you have something, which means in the next," he checked his watch, 30 to 40 minutes, they're going to shift from containment inside the building to active search outside it. "How many of them are there?" "Inside the building, counting the 1 in the server room and the 2 in the parking structure, minimum 6, probably closer to 10. He said it the way a plumber might estimate pipe footage. Measured, not emotional. "Outside, I don't know. Depends on how deep Meridian's operation actually runs." Dara, from the corner table. "Meridian Strategic Group was incorporated 7 years ago. They have offices in 4 cities, none of which are in this state. Their primary public-facing revenue is listed as management consulting for technology firms in transition." She'd turned her phone back on briefly to look something up, and now had it face down again. "The timing matters. 7 years ago is when your father first filed the foundational patents on the architecture that became Aria." The table was quiet for a moment. They've been building toward this since the beginning, Vanessa said. Or they started tracking it when the patents became public and spent 5 years getting positioned, Dara said. Same result, different starting point. Ethan was looking at Dara with a particular kind of attention. What else did you find? I found that one of Meridian's listed advisors, buried in a 3-year-old regulatory filing, is a name I recognize from our own board meeting minutes. She said the name, Daniel Cho. Vanessa felt the specific cold that comes not from surprise, but from confirmation of something you'd been hoping was wrong. Daniel Cho, board member. The man who had, at the last quarterly review, asked the most intelligent questions about Area's competitive positioning and received the most detailed answers because she'd taken his interest as genuine engagement. How many of them? She said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. At minimum, Holt, Reeves, and Cho from the documents we have, Dara said. Webb on the security side. And at least one person with access to the network monitoring system because someone disabled the external alert protocols before the blackout. That flag we saw was only visible internally. It never went out. IT, Vanessa said. Someone in IT. My guess, too. Ethan had gone back to watching the window. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary thing. Foot traffic, a delivery truck double-parked, 2 women with strollers navigating around it. Normal city. Normal afternoon. And somewhere in or around Ashcroft Tower, people with the kind of resources that bought 7 years of patience were now reorienting their search. We need to move in 10 minutes, he said without turning from the window. Not because of anything specific. Just as a general principle, staying in one place after you've had a known communication point is bad practice. My attorney is calling back in 15, Vanessa said. Then we move after that. She sat down across from Dara and did something she hadn't done since the blackout, which was let herself stop moving for a moment and feel the actual weight of where she was. The documents in Ethan's utility bag. 40 pages of physical evidence and the photos on Dara's phone. 3 people in a coffee shop 2 blocks from a building full of people who had decided, at some point over the last 7 years, that what she'd built was worth more to them dead than alive. The ARIA system, she said to Dara. The core. The parts they didn't copy. What did we actually protect? Dara's expression shifted slightly. The transfer was at 23% when I killed it. ARIA's core architecture is modular. The first 20% is what you'd call the outer shell. Interface protocols, basic processing parameters, things that look impressive if you don't know what you're looking at, but don't constitute the actual innovation. She paused. What they got is like stealing the cover and the table of contents of a book. Structurally incomplete. Can they build from it? With the right people and unlimited time, maybe they could reverse engineer something adjacent. But ARIA's innovation isn't the architecture alone. It's the recursive learning layer, and that's in the last 30% of the system. Dara's voice was careful, precise, the way it always was when she talked about the things she'd spent 3 years building. They didn't get it. Vanessa let out a breath. Okay, she said. Okay. But they'll know that, Dara added, once their people analyze what they have, which means this isn't over when we get out. They'll need another run at it. Ethan turned from the window, which is why the evidence matters more than the escape. Getting out of the building was step 1. What we do with what we're carrying is the actual fight. Mercer called back on the coffee shop landline 13 minutes later. The federal contact was a woman named Supervisory Special Agent Claire Huang, out of the Bureau's Financial Crimes and Corporate Fraud Division. Mercer had worked with her on a securities case 4 years prior and trusted her specifically because, he said, she was someone who did not need the credit for making a case in order to make it. She had been briefed, broadly, and was requesting a meeting at a location she would specify. Vanessa wrote the address on a napkin. A law office, 12 blocks north. Neutral ground, not federal property. Huang's call, which Mercer said was a deliberate choice because walking into a federal building with this kind of case against people who potentially had political connections required care. She'll have 2 people with her, Mercer said. I'll be there already when you arrive. Vanessa, don't take a car service. Pay cash for a cab if you can find one, or walk. She hung up and looked at Ethan. Can you walk 12 blocks? He looked at his cut jaw, his maintenance uniform, the utility bag over his shoulder. I walk 12 blocks for a living, he said. Let's go. They were 8 blocks north when things changed. It was Ethan who noticed it first, which was becoming a pattern she'd stopped being surprised by. A slight change in his walking pace. Not faster, but more deliberate, the way someone moves when they've added new information to a calculation. "Don't look back," he said quietly. "There's a gray sedan that's made the last 2 turns with us, maintaining distance." "Police?" Vanessa said. "Maybe, but they're not identifying themselves, and a police tail at this distance is usually either very good or very not police." He thought for a moment. "Cross at the next light. Stay with the pedestrian crowd. When we get to the other side, I want to go into the pharmacy on the corner." The pharmacy. "It has a back exit to the side street. I've been in it before." A pause. "Maya needed cough medicine in November." The detail was so specific and so ordinary in the context of everything that had happened in the last 2 hours that it landed strangely. A father, a sick kid, a late-night pharmacy run. Underneath all of it, just that. They crossed. They went into the pharmacy. Ethan paused at a display of vitamins near the entrance and watched the window without appearing to watch it, and 15 seconds later the gray sedan cruised past without stopping. "Not following on foot," he said. "They've got someone ahead then, or they were hoping we'd lead them somewhere." He thought. "We're 4 blocks from the law office. We go through the side street and we go fast." "Define fast," Dara said. "Regular fast, not running. Running draws eyes." They went through the pharmacy's back exit, which did, as he'd said, open to a side street, and they walked the remaining 4 blocks without incident, unless you counted Vanessa's heart rate, which remained approximately 20 beats above its usual territory the entire time. The law office was on the 14th floor of a building old enough to have a human elevator operator, a small detail that struck Vanessa as both anachronistic and, under the circumstances, oddly comforting. The elevator operator was a man in his 60s who said nothing and pressed the button for 14 as if he ferried people running from corporate conspiracies every other Thursday. Mercer met them in the hallway outside the office suite. He was 71, a small, precise man who wore the same style of dark suit he'd been wearing since the 80s, and had the particular bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people were lying and had long since stopped being bothered by it. He looked at the 3 of them. Vanessa, in her charcoal blazer, Dara with her phone held like a second heart, Ethan in his maintenance uniform with dried blood on his jaw, and said, with complete equanimity, "You all look like you've had a morning." "We have," Vanessa said. He held the door open. "Agent Huang is inside. She's direct. Don't try to manage the narrative. Give her what you have in order, and let her do what she does." Claire Huang was direct. She was also younger than Vanessa had expected. Early 40s, maybe, with the kind of focused energy that comes from doing exactly the work you want to be doing. She had 2 colleagues in the room, both quiet, both taking notes on legal pads rather than devices, which Vanessa also registered as a deliberate choice. They went through it in order. Vanessa talked, Dara produced the photographs on her phone, Ethan produced the physical documents from the utility bag and laid them on the conference table. Huang listened the way Mercer had on the phone, fully, without interrupting, without performing reactions. When Vanessa got to the part about the gray sedan, Huang glanced at one of her colleagues, and something passed between them that Vanessa didn't have the context to read. "The man you subdued in the server room," Huang said, when Vanessa had finished. "Do you know if he's still in the building?" "He was zip-tied," Ethan said. "In the building's power-down state, most of the internal communication infrastructure was down. They may not have found him yet." Huang looked at him for a moment, calm, assessing. "Mr. Carter, what's your background specifically?" A pause. Ethan held her gaze. "Navy," he said. "Special operations. I left 8 years ago." "Why maintenance work now?" "My daughter," he said, the same 2 words he'd given Vanessa in the tunnel, the same flat sincerity. "She needs a father who comes home on a schedule." Huang held his gaze for another second, and then something in her face shifted, just slightly, just enough to be human. "Okay," she said. She turned back to the documents and began going through them with the precise attention of someone who was simultaneously reading for content and constructing a legal architecture in her head. "The issue," she said, after 8 minutes, "is that the building is still under their operational control. Your evidence is here. Good. But whatever is still in that building, the server equipment, any additional documentation, and the people involved. That's all behind a perimeter they're currently controlling. She set a document down. They know the transfer failed. They know you're gone. They are now in a position where their best option is to clean the scene and establish an alternative narrative. Which means framing someone, Dara said. Huang looked at her. Yes. The word landed in the room with the weight of something that had been coming and was no longer abstract. Who? Vanessa said. Huang looked at Ethan, and Vanessa felt it, the specific nauseating click of a piece falling into place she hadn't seen moving. Me, Ethan said. Not a question. He said it the way you say something when you've already worked it out and were waiting for confirmation. A former special operations soldier, now employed as maintenance staff, was found in the building's server room during the sabotage event, Huang said carefully. He has the technical knowledge to orchestrate a disruption of this scale. His position gave him unrestricted access to every floor, every mechanical system, every security blind spot. She paused. From the outside, it's a workable narrative. Disgruntled former military employee, insider access, possible outside contractor relationship. Meridian would have a file on him already, Dara said, or they'd build one fast. If they haven't already started, they've been building it since they identified him as a complication. Huang looked at the physical documents on the table. This evidence clears him, clearly, but evidence takes time to process, and if they move first with a public statement, they damage everything, Vanessa said. My credibility, his credibility, the evidence itself. She felt the anger she'd been carrying since the tunnel sharpened into something cleaner and colder. They're not trying to escape. They're trying to control the story long enough to make the truth look like spin. Yes, Huang said. Which is why we have approximately, she checked her watch, 2 hours before they solidify that narrative publicly. Once they've made a statement to law enforcement attributing the sabotage to an inside actor, we spend the next 6 months untangling it instead of prosecuting it. The room was quiet. So what do we do in 2 hours? Vanessa said. Huang looked at her with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the conversation to arrive at this particular point. We need to get back into that building, she said. Not you, my team. But to do that without triggering a standoff that buries the evidence in legal challenge, I need something from inside the building system right now. I need Arya's core system to transmit the documentation it has stored in its administrative archive, the internal communications, the executive access logs, the server activity records from today, directly to a federal receiver. Arya can do that, Dara said immediately. Its administrative function can transmit to an external certified receiver without a physical interface, as long as the core system is still running. She looked at Vanessa. Is the core still running? The blackout only hit occupied floors, Vanessa said, remembering what Ethan had said in the sub-basement. They cut power selectively. Arya's core runs on its own isolated power loop in the server room, as long as they haven't physically disconnected it. The system was still running when we left, Dara said. The mirror device was pulling from it, which means it's still up, Vanessa finished. She looked at Huang. I can transmit remotely. I have executive override access that doesn't require physical presence. She paused. I need a device with a secure connection and about 15 minutes. Huang nodded once. One of her colleagues was already opening a case on the side table. There's something else, Ethan said. Everyone looked at him. He was still standing, had not sat down since they'd entered the room, which she noticed only now. Standing near the window, not looking out of it, looking at the documents on the conference table. If they're building a frame, they're building it fast, which means someone in the building is coordinating with someone outside it right now. He looked at Huang. You said the gray sedan might have had someone ahead of us. That means they've already got people on the street. If you move a federal team toward the building without taking that perimeter down first, they'll know it's coming before your people get within 2 blocks. Huang looked at him steadily. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the building has a maintenance frequency, he said. A radio channel that nobody at the executive level knows about, because nobody at the executive level ever needed to. The maintenance team uses it for internal coordination. If someone is still in there, any of the regular building staff who aren't part of this, they can relay what's happening on the inside. Real time. Do you have someone in there? Huang said. A pause. I might, he said. There's a guy, second shift maintenance supervisor named Oscar Ruiz. He's been in that building for 14 years and he's not involved in anything. I'd stake a lot on that. If he's still inside, he'll still be on the channel. We have a radio, Dara said. Ethan reached into the utility bag, past the documents, into one of the smaller side pockets, and produced a compact two-way radio, the kind that building maintenance teams use, and that nobody in an executive suite ever thinks about. He turned it on. It hummed quietly. He clicked to a frequency from memory and said quietly, "The way you say something when you don't know who's listening." "Oscar, you there?" Static. 10 seconds of it. Then, "Carter?" A voice, low, rough around the edges. The voice of a man who was probably in a very small space and very unhappy about what the day had become. "Man, where are you? What the hell is happening in this building?" Ethan exhaled, just slightly. "I'm out. I'm safe. Are you secure right now?" "I'm in the mechanical room on 21. I locked myself in about an hour ago when those guys in the stairwell..." The voice dropped lower. "Carter, there are people with guns in this building. Not our security. I don't know who they are." "I know. Listen to me. How many can you see from where you are?" "I've got a monitor for the corridor cameras. Maybe 3 guys on 21. 2 more I can see on 25. There's somebody coordinating from the conference room on 38. I can see them, but I can't hear them." A pause. "Webb is with them." Huang was listening intently. One of her colleagues was already on a phone, speaking quietly into it. "Oscar," Ethan said, "I need you to stay put, and I need you to keep telling me what you see. Can you do that?" "Are the police coming?" "Better," Ethan said. "Stay on the channel." He looked at Huang. She was already on her own phone, and the conversation had shifted into the specific shorthand of people deploying resources, and Vanessa watched it happen. The activation of something larger and more institutional, and significantly less improvised than what the 3 of them had been running for the last 2 hours. Something loosened in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. But the particular easing that comes when you've been carrying something alone and you finally manage to hand part of it to someone whose job it is to hold it. She sat down at the prepared workstation and opened the secure connection to Area's administrative function, and the interface came up, slightly slow, running on the isolated power loop, but running. And she entered her executive override credentials and began configuring the transmission. 15 minutes, Dara had said, maybe less. "Talk me through it," Vanessa said to Dara. "Select the administrative archive, there, that menu, and the access log database. You want everything from the last 6 weeks, not just today. The pre-positioning would have started showing up in the access logs at least a month ago." Dara was leaning over her shoulder, and her voice had shifted into its professional register, the one that was entirely about the problem in front of her, and nothing else. "Federal receiver address, Agent Huang?" Huang read it off from memory. Vanessa typed it in. "Initiating transmission," Vanessa said. The progress bar on the screen began its slow movement. 12 minutes estimated. On the radio, Oscar's voice. "Carter, they're moving people down from 38. Looks like they're going toward the archive floors." 32? Ethan said. "Yeah." Ethan looked at Vanessa. "They know the transmission is running. The system would log it. They can see it from the server room." He looked at Huang. "They're going to try to physically interrupt the connection." "How long can it sustain without physical interruption?" Huang asked Dara. "The core system's connection is isolated from the floor power cuts. If they physically disconnect the hardware, the transmission stops." Dara's voice was steady. "If they're on 32 now, they're about 8 minutes from the server room." "We need 4 minutes of buffer," Ethan said. "You can't go back in there," Vanessa said. He looked at her. Not with the expression she expected. Not resolve, not bravado. Just the quiet, factual face. "I know the building better than anyone they have," he said. "And Oscar can guide me through where they are." "Ethan, there's a maintenance access point 2 blocks from here that connects to the building's mechanical level. I can be at the server room before they get there from 32. He was already picking up the radio. "I just need to keep them occupied for 4 minutes." "That's not a plan," she said. "That's a direction." "Most plans are," he said. Huang had finished her call. She looked at Ethan. "I have a team 3 minutes out from the building. If you go in, you are not law enforcement, and I cannot authorize your actions." "I know," he said. "If you're in the building when my team enters, You stay out of their way, and you identify yourself immediately, and you do exactly what they tell you. Yes. A pause. Huang looked at him the way she'd looked at the documents, carefully, thoroughly, without performing a reaction. Don't get shot, she said. That's the plan, he said, and he was already at the door and Vanessa stood up from the workstation without deciding to and said his name. He stopped, turned. She didn't know what she'd been going to say. Something inadequate, probably. Something that covered too much ground for the seconds available. She looked at him. The maintenance uniform, the cut jaw, the utility bag with its 40 pages of other people's betrayal. And what she said was, Maya gets out at 3:15. Something shifted in his face. Not softened. It wasn't quite that. Something that had been held in its tight containment for a long time recognized itself being seen. I know, he said. I'll be done by then. He left. The door closed. On the secure workstation, the transmission progress bar ticked forward, 63%, 64. And Vanessa sat back down and watched it move, and Dara stood beside her and watched it too. And Huang was on her radio coordinating something Vanessa couldn't fully hear, and outside in the city, Ethan Carter was walking fast toward a building that had his name on a frame they were building in an office on the 38th floor, and he was walking toward it anyway, because that was apparently the kind of man he was. The progress bar hit 70%, then 75. Oscar's voice crackled on the radio, still on the table where Ethan had left it. They're on 34, moving fast. 80%. 83. Dara reached over and turned the radio volume up. 86%. Dara said it out loud, quietly, like she was talking to the progress bar rather than to anyone in the room. Vanessa watched the number and tried not to watch the radio and failed at both. Oscar's voice again. 35. They're moving faster now. Someone told them to hurry. Huang was at the window, phone to her ear, relaying coordinates to her team in a low, continuous murmur. One of her colleagues had taken over note-taking and the other was on a second phone, and the room had the feel of something that had shifted gears. Less deliberate, more kinetic. The specific energy of people who know the window is closing and are doing the math on whether they fit through it. Vanessa thought about Ethan in the maintenance tunnel, moving the way he moved, that deliberate, unhurried pace that was somehow faster than running. She thought about the cut on his jaw and the analog watch, and Maya getting out of school at 3:15, and the specific category of irrational thing she was doing right now, which was worrying about a man she'd known for approximately 2.5 hours, as if that were enough time to worry about someone. It wasn't, and she was doing it anyway, 89%. Carter. Oscar's voice on the radio, different now. Lower, tighter. You in yet? Static. Then Ethan's voice, slightly breathless, the first time she'd heard anything physically effortful in it. Mechanical level, 2 minutes to server room. They're on 36. A pause. Some kind of calculation happening on the other end of the radio. How many? 3 I can see on the corridor monitor, moving in a group. Okay. That was all. Just okay, and then the sound of movement. 92%. Vanessa became aware that she was gripping the edge of the workstation table. She made herself let go. Her fingers had left slight pressure marks on the plastic edge. Huang, she said. The agent turned from the window. If your team enters the building and Ethan is already inside and they don't know where he is, I have his description and the maintenance frequency. My team lead knows to listen for him on the channel. Huang's voice was steady. Not reassuring in the performative sense, just factual, which was more useful. Mr. Carter knows how to make himself identifiable without getting himself shot. I think we both understand that he's done this before. He has a daughter, Vanessa said. Huang held her gaze for a moment. I know, she said, and turned back to the window. 95. Oscar. 37. They're splitting up. One's going to the stairwell. Ethan, on the radio. I'm at the server room. Doors open. The system is still running. A pause. I can see the transmission on the active monitor, 96%. 97 on Vanessa's screen. Carter, Oscar said. The one in the stairwell is going down. He's coming to you. How long? A minute. Maybe less. 98. Vanessa leaned forward without meaning to. I hear him, Ethan said on the radio. His voice had gone very quiet. He's in the sub-basement corridor. 99. The progress bar hung there for 3 seconds that felt like something considerably longer, and then it moved, and the screen read, "Transmission complete, received and verified," and Dara exhaled so sharply it was almost a word. "It's through," Vanessa said. "Huang, it's through." Huang was already talking into her phone. "Transmit confirmed. Move now. All points." On the radio, the sound of something. Impact, movement, a brief and violent exchange of sound that lasted maybe 20 seconds and then stopped. Then Ethan's voice, slightly more uneven than usual. "One down. He's not going anywhere." A breath. "Oscar, the ones on 37, which direction?" They split. 2 went back up toward 38. One's still coming your way. Different stairwell. He'll be on you in 30 seconds. "Is the door to the parking structure still clear on B2? Far as I can see." "Then I'm moving." A pause. "Oscar, get somewhere low and stay there until you hear federal badges on your floor." "Already there, man," Oscar's voice. "Already there." Whoa. The federal team entered Ashcroft Tower at 2:47 in the afternoon through 3 simultaneous access points, which Vanessa learned later from Huang's debrief, delivered in the same measured tone she'd used for everything else. Front lobby, loading dock, and the Harlan Building maintenance tunnel connection. That last entry point suggested by someone on Huang's team who had, by coincidence or design, pulled the building schematic before the operation and noticed it. The operation inside the building lasted 40 minutes. Not the cinematic 40 minutes of action sequences and last-second reversals, but the bureaucratic, procedural 40 minutes of trained professionals executing a planned search and containment, which is slower and less dramatic and considerably more permanent in its results. Raymond Holt was found in the 38th floor conference room. On a phone call he ended the moment the agents entered. He said nothing. His attorney would say plenty over the following weeks, but in that moment, in the room where he had coordinated the destruction of something he'd pretended for years to support, he simply put the phone down and looked at the table and said nothing. Carla Reeves, according to the debrief, tried a different approach. Told the agents there had been a misunderstanding, that she was as much a victim of the day's events as anyone, that there were forces at work in this building that had been deliberately targeting her. The agent who received this information wrote it down and told her she could explain further at the federal building, and she stopped talking. Daniel Cho was not in the building. He had left, apparently, sometime in the first 30 minutes of the operation. One of the people Huang's outdoor perimeter team identified and stopped 2 blocks from the tower, sitting in a car with a briefcase that contained, among other things, a personal copy of the partial area transmission data. This would later be described in the federal filing as extraordinarily helpful evidence of intent. Marcus Webb was found on the 22nd floor. He'd been trying to reach the roof access, which said something about his planning or the failure of it. He did not try to explain himself. He looked, according to the agent who detained him, like a man who had run a very long race and had already known, somewhere in the last mile, that he wasn't going to win. The man Ethan had left zip-tied in the sub-basement server room was found still there, still tied, and had apparently spent the intervening hours in a state of resigned waiting that suggested some professional experience with things going wrong. Ethan was found at B2, the parking structure, coming through the maintenance door from the sub-basement just as Huang's team was clearing the level. He identified himself immediately on the channel, the way Huang had said he would, and the team lead told him to show his hands and come slowly, and he did, and then he stood there in the dim parking structure light, and a federal agent looked at his maintenance uniform, and the utility bag and the cut on his jaw, still not bandaged, still slightly oozing, and said, "You Carter?" "Yeah," he said. "You're clear. Stay with Agent Reyes until the level is secured." He stayed with Agent Reyes. It took 11 minutes, and then he asked to use someone's phone, and he called a number from memory, and he said to whoever answered, "Hey, it's me. I'm going to be a little late picking up Maya. Can you keep her till 4? A pause. "Yeah, I know. I'll explain later. Thanks." He handed the phone back to the agent. "Thanks," he said, and sat down on the hood of a parked car and waited. Vanessa arrived at Ashcroft Tower at 4:20 in a car with Huang and 2 of her colleagues after 2 hours at the law office that had involved a federal affidavit, 3 cups of coffee she drank without tasting, and a phone call to her company's communications director that lasted 6 minutes and covered a great deal of ground very quickly. The building's power had been restored at 3:40. The lobby was lit again, the security systems were back online under temporary federal oversight, and a row of news vans was establishing itself on the sidewalk across the street with the particular efficiency of people who know they're in front of something significant and want to be positioned when it breaks. She walked through the lobby, her lobby, the marble floors and the high ceilings, and the bronze lettering above the reception desk that read Ashcroft Technologies. And it looked the same as it always had and felt entirely different, the way places feel different after something has happened in them that you know, and they don't. Dara was already upstairs, in the server room, assessing the state of the systems with the focused unhappiness of an engineer confronting damage. The mirror device had been removed and bagged as evidence. The area core was running clean. The administrative archive transmission had been received and was already in the hands of the federal prosecution team, which Mercer described over text as moving with unusual speed, by which he meant that the evidence was so clean and so comprehensive that the usual bureaucratic hesitation wasn't finding much to hesitate about. She found Ethan in the building's ground floor maintenance office, which was a room she had never been in despite 14 months in the building. It was what it was. Metal desk, folding chair, schedules on the wall, the smell of machine oil and floor cleaner. He was sitting at the desk with a first aid kit open in front of him, finally dealing with the cut on his jaw using the specific graceless self-sufficiency of someone who has patched himself up enough times that it's just logistics. She knocked on the open door. He looked up, set down the gauze. She came in and sat in the other folding chair, the one on the other side of the metal desk, and they looked at each other in the fluorescent light of the maintenance office, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised her, given everything. "You made it before 3:15, she said. 4:15, he said. "I said 4. "Still made it." "Yeah." He looked at the gauze in his hand. "Mrs. Delgado next door keeps Maya sometimes. She doesn't mind." A pause. "Maya minds a little. She doesn't like it when I'm late without warning." "Understandable," Vanessa said. "At 7, you're the whole picture. Someone being late with no warning is—" "Yeah," he said. He set the gauze down on the desk. "She'll be okay." Vanessa looked around the maintenance office. The schedules on the wall. A coffee mug with a cartoon on it she couldn't quite see from this distance. A child's drawing, taped to the edge of the metal desk. Crayon, blue and yellow. A figure that might have been a man and a smaller figure beside it. She looked at it and looked away. "The transmission went through," she said. "I know. Heard it on the radio. Arya's intact, the core, the part that actually matters. They got 23% of the shell and nothing that lets them reconstruct the real system." She paused. "Dara says it's like stealing someone's front door and expecting to move into the house." Something in his face shifted. The closest he came to a smile, which was not quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. "Good," he said. "Holt, Reeves, Webb, all in federal custody. Cho was picked up outside." She watched him. "They're also looking at Meridian Strategic Group as a coordinated entity. Huang thinks they can build a criminal conspiracy case that goes beyond today's operation." "That'll take time," he said. "Years, probably. These things always do." She looked at the desk. "But the evidence is clean. Mercer says the prosecution team is already calling it one of the more complete documentary records of corporate fraud they've seen at this scale. Apparently most people, when they're planning to destroy someone's company, don't keep quite so much paper." "Arrogance," he said. "They thought they were going to control the outcome so the evidence never mattered. They were almost right." "Almost," he said. Another silence. Outside the maintenance office door, she could hear the building returning to something like itself. The hum of the ventilation system, the distant sound of footsteps in the lobby, the specific ambient frequency of 460 people's workplace reasserting its identity. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "When this becomes public, and it will, probably by tonight, your name is going to be part of it, what you did today, who you are." She held his gaze. "I don't think that's something I can prevent, and I'm not sure it would be right to try." He was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating quiet, the other kind. The kind that's actually about feeling something and deciding what to do with it. "I know," he said. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can just say no. He waited. When Huang's team does their official debrief, which will include your full background, your service record, some of that is going to become part of a public case file. That means reporters, eventually. And people who will want to tell the story of the former Navy SEAL who was working maintenance in a building, and I know what the story sounds like, he said. I know what people will make of it. What do you want to make of it? She said. He looked at the child's drawing on the edge of the desk. The blue and yellow crayon figures, careful and slightly lopsided the way 7-year-old drawings are. He looked at it for long enough that she didn't rush him. I want Maya to understand what I do, he said, finally. Not the military stuff. She knows about that roughly, in the version of it that's appropriate for 7. But what I did today. He paused. She knows I work in a building. She knows I take care of things that break. I didn't make the maintenance work sound small to her because it isn't small, but she doesn't know the other part of what I carry. The part that kept 2 people alive today, Vanessa said. He looked at her. The part that makes me wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes, he said flatly and without self-pity. Because of things that happened in places I can't name in years she wasn't alive yet. That part. A pause. She doesn't need to know all of it, but she's going to hear things after this, and I'd rather she hear them from me first. Vanessa nodded. She didn't try to say anything that would smooth it over or make it tidier than it was. For what it's worth, she said, after a moment, what she'll hear, the version that ends up in whatever they write about today, is that her father walked toward the dangerous thing when everyone else ran away, and then he went home. Ethan looked at the drawing again. That's a reasonable summary, he said. The press statement went out at 6:47 that evening under Vanessa's name, in language she and Mercer and the communications director had worked through in 90 minutes of focused drafting that produced something she was mostly satisfied with. It was factual, measured, and contained precisely the information that was ready to be public and nothing that wasn't. It confirmed the attempted sabotage. It confirmed federal involvement and ongoing prosecution. It confirmed that the company's core technology was intact, and the previously scheduled product launch would be rescheduled within 30 days. It did not name Ethan Carter. That was his request, delivered through Mercer, and she honored it. There would be case filings eventually. The public record would get to him. But that was different from being named in a press release. The story he wanted to tell his daughter was going to be his to tell, in his timing, in his words. What it did confirm, in a single line near the end, was that an employee of Ashcroft Tower had demonstrated extraordinary courage during the incident and was instrumental in securing the evidence that led to the federal case. She'd written that line herself. It was insufficient, and it was what she had permission to say, and she said it. The statement went to 212 journalists at 6:47. By 7:15, it had been picked up by 4 major financial news outlets. By 8 o'clock, the competitor companies whose names were adjacent to Meridian's were issuing their own carefully worded statements about having no involvement in any activities of the kind described, which was the kind of statement that told you a great deal about what they were worried about. Vanessa read them at her desk on the 38th floor. Her desk, her conference table, the room that had been command central for Raymond Holt's operation approximately 6 hours ago, and was now, again, just a room with a view and too much glass furniture. Someone had opened the blackout curtains. The city was lit up outside, dark now, the financial district doing its nighttime thing of looking simultaneously empty and alive. She had a glass of water on the desk. She'd wanted something stronger, but the water was what was there, and she drank it and looked at the city and tried to take stock of the day, which was a thing she usually did at the end of each day with some degree of success, and was finding tonight somewhat harder than usual. They had tried to take everything she'd built, not just Aria, the company, the employees, the 3 years in her father's foundational decade, and the thing that the company was supposed to become. They had planned it carefully and executed it nearly perfectly, and what had stopped them was a 40-page file of their own careless paper trail, one engineer who photographed documents while other people were having emotional realizations, and a maintenance worker who knew where the tunnels went. It was not a triumphant inventory. It was an honest one. Her phone rang. Unknown number, which 12 hours ago she would have screened, and now she answered immediately because unknown numbers had taken on a different character today. Ms. Ashcroft, a voice she didn't recognize. male, measured, the specific measured quality of someone senior in an institution. My name is Director Hollis. I'm with the Defense Advanced Programs Office. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. She almost said something that would have been inappropriate. She refrained. It's been an interesting day, she said. I'm aware of that. I've been briefed. A pause. I'm calling because the profile that emerged from today's federal operation, including the background of a certain individual who assisted you, has come to our attention. We have an interest in speaking with Mr. Carter about a potential consulting arrangement, a significant one. Another pause. I understand you may have his contact information. She sat back in her chair, looked at the city through the glass. I have his contact information, she said. But I think you should understand something about Mr. Carter before you make that call. And what's that? He has a daughter, she said. She gets out of school at 3:15, and that's not a secondary consideration for him. It's the primary one. She paused. Whatever you're thinking of offering, I'd think carefully about whether it fits around that. A silence on the other end. Slightly surprised, she thought, or recalibrating. I'll take that into account, the director said. I'd pass that message along myself, she said. But I think it's more useful coming from you directly when you call him, so that he understands from the beginning how the conversation is going to go. She gave him Ethan's number. They ended the call. She sat for a moment, alone in the glass-walled room, the city outside, the company's 460 people theoretically going home to their ordinary evenings, in possession of futures that had almost been taken from them by the people who were supposed to protect those futures. Then she picked up her phone and called Mercer. The launch, she said when he answered. 30 days. I want to go further than the original plan. Not just the product demonstration, the full commercial rollout. The complete version. A pause. That's aggressive. They spent 7 years trying to stop it, she said. I'm not waiting another 30 days more than I have to. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear the old attorney considering. I'll talk to the board, he said. What's left of it? Which is a strange sentence to have to say. The board will be fine, she said. We'll rebuild it, better than it was. She paused, starting with people who haven't been consulting for companies called Meridian Strategic Group. A reasonable baseline requirement, Mercer said dryly. Good night, Vanessa. Good night. She ended the call and sat for another minute in the quiet office, and then she stood up and straightened the glass furniture because it was slightly crooked from something that had happened during the day, and she picked up her bag and she turned off her desk lamp. The maintenance office on the ground floor was dark when she passed it on her way out. The first aid kit had been put away. The coffee mug with the cartoon was still on the desk. The child's drawing, blue and yellow crayon, 2 figures, slightly lopsided, was still taped to the edge. She looked at it for a moment through the open door in the dim lobby light, and then she went out through the front entrance into the night. 3 days later, in a conference room at the federal building, Ethan Carter sat across a table from 2 agents and gave a debrief that lasted 4 hours. He answered everything directly, asked for clarification when something was unclear, and at no point tried to manage what they were going to do with what he told them. When it was over, one of the agents shook his hand and held it a fraction of a second longer than a standard handshake, the way people sometimes do when the words available aren't quite equal to the moment. Ethan thanked them for their time and left. He picked Maya up from school that afternoon at exactly 3:15. She was standing at the edge of the pickup zone with her backpack, which was shaped like a turtle and was a full third of her body size. And when she saw him, she did the thing she always did, which was break into a run for the last 20 feet, because she was 7 and had not yet learned that arriving at things slowly was sometimes appropriate. He crouched down and caught her, which he'd been doing since she was 4 and was going to keep doing until she told him to stop. And she told him he smelled like the building, which was her way of saying she'd missed him. I know, he said. Sorry. You were on the news, she said into his shoulder. Her voice was slightly muffled and extremely accusatory. Mrs. Delgado showed me. She was very excited. Yeah. She said you were a hero. He stood up with her still attached, which was getting harder as she got bigger, and which he did not intend to mention. Mrs. Delgado gets excited about a lot of things, he said. Maya leaned back and looked at him with the specific, evaluating look of a 7-year-old who is deciding how much of the adult explanation to believe. She had his eyes, which he'd been told by everyone who'd known him long enough, and right now those eyes were doing a thorough job of assessment. "Were you?" she said. He looked at her, his daughter. Turtle backpack and two big eyes and the absolute unpretentious directness of a child who hasn't learned yet that most questions don't get straight answers. "I did my job," he said, "and I came home." She considered this, apparently found it satisfactory, or close enough. She put her head back on his shoulder. "Okay," she said. "Can we have pasta tonight?" "Yeah," he said. "We can have pasta." He carried her to the car. The city went about its business around them. Somewhere across town, in a glass-walled office, 460 people were doing their jobs in a building that was still standing because of a 40-page file and one engineer's steady hands and a maintenance worker who knew where the tunnels went. He buckled Maya into her booster seat, tossed her turtle backpack in the back, and drove them home. The trial of Raymond Holt began on a Tuesday in late March, 8 months after the day Ashcroft Tower went dark. Vanessa did not attend the opening session. She'd been advised by Mercer that her presence in the courtroom during the early proceedings would be interpreted correctly as a statement, and that statements made in person tended to generate coverage that could complicate the prosecution's rhythm. She understood the reasoning. She stayed at the office and read the transcripts that evening, sitting at her desk with a cup of tea that went cold, going through the federal prosecutor's opening argument line by line, the way she went through everything, methodically, completely, not skipping the parts that were hard. The argument was good. The evidence was better. What Dara had photographed in the compliance archive, what the ARIA administrative system had transmitted to Huang's federal receiver, what the federal team had recovered from Daniel Cho's briefcase in the 38th floor conference room. Together they constituted what the lead prosecutor described, in her opening, as one of the most thoroughly documented cases of coordinated corporate fraud and industrial espionage. Espionage her office had prosecuted in 15 years. The kind of case, she told the jury, where the defendant's own records did most of the prosecution's work. Holt's defense tried several approaches over the following weeks. The first was procedural, challenging the admissibility of the ARIA transmission on the grounds that it had been initiated under duress, which the judge disposed of in a written ruling that Mercer described as unusually direct. The second was narrative, constructing an alternative account in which Holt had been himself deceived by Meridian, a pawn rather than an architect. This one lasted longer because it had the advantage of being partially true. Holt had been in contact with Meridian for 6 years, but the paper trail showed clearly that contact had begun as a choice and had remained one. The third approach was silence, which Holt himself elected after the second week, stopping his testimony mid-sequence over his own attorney's visible objection, sitting back in the chair, and looking at the table in a way that reminded the federal agent who'd detained him on day one of the same expression in the 38th floor conference room. Carla Reeves took a plea agreement in the 5th week. Holt and Cho went to verdict. Webb, who had turned cooperative early and substantially, testified for 3 days and was the most useful person in the courtroom, in the specific way that people who know exactly how something was built are useful when the goal is to show a jury precisely how it worked. Guilty on all primary counts for both remaining defendants. The sentencing came 6 weeks after verdict, and it was significant, and Vanessa read those transcripts the same way she'd read all the others, at her desk, in the evening, alone, with tea she forgot to drink. She did not feel triumphant. She'd expected to, a little, and she didn't. What she felt was something more like the specific exhaustion that comes after you've been holding a weight for a long time and have finally been able to set it down, and your arms don't immediately know what to do without it. Not relief, not satisfaction, just the strange lightness of something being over. She turned off her desk lamp and went home. What? ARIA launched on a Wednesday, 26 days after the original planned date, which Vanessa counted privately as close enough. The press conference was in the building's main presentation hall, the same space that had been prepared for the original launch, repaired and cleaned and carrying no visible evidence of what had happened in it, the way buildings absorb events and then simply continue. She stood at the podium in front of 340 journalists, analysts, investors, and employees, and she did the things she'd been trained from childhood to do in front of large rooms of people who needed to believe in something. She told the truth simply, and let it be enough. She explained what ARIA was, technically, in terms that a person with no engineering background could follow. She explained what it meant commercially, in terms that the investors could price. And then she said something that wasn't in the prepared remarks, which she'd decided the night before to include because the prepared remarks felt incomplete without it. She said that the technology she was presenting had been built by people who had chosen, over 3 years, to keep building it when there were easier things they could have done. That the company standing in front of her was not the company that had been planned on the day she took over. It was smaller in some ways, different in structure, rebuilt from a breach that had taken from it several people who had once been trusted, and that the process of rebuilding, of examining what had failed and understanding why and changing it, had produced something more honest than the original version. Not better in every way, more honest. She didn't explain what she meant by that in detail. She let it sit there, the way things sit when they're true and don't need elaboration. The demonstration ran for 40 minutes and performed without a single error, which Dara, watching from the side of the room, later described as a minor miracle, and then corrected herself and said it was the result of 6 months of comprehensive testing and not a miracle at all. The coverage was extensive. The financial analysis was favorable. 3 major partnership inquiries came in within 72 hours, and 2 of them were serious. The Meridian-adjacent companies that had issued careful statements 8 months ago now issued different careful statements about being interested in the emerging possibilities presented by Ashcroft Technologies' innovative platform. Vanessa read those statements too, with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite contempt, but lived in the territory between them. Ethan had been coming to the 38th floor once a week since October. It had started practically. Vanessa had asked him, 3 weeks after the federal debrief, if he'd be willing to do a security assessment of the building's physical infrastructure. Not officially, not as any kind of contracted arrangement, just a walkthrough with her and the new head of building operations. A woman named Terrence, who'd come from a logistics background and had the specific gift of listening to technical information and immediately understanding its operational implications. He'd done the walkthrough. It had taken 4 hours and had covered every floor, every maintenance tunnel, every access point and mechanical system and security blind spot. At the end of it, Terrence had looked at Vanessa and said quietly, "We should have had someone like this from the beginning." "Yes," Vanessa said. "We should have." The second visit had been less formal. She'd called him, she had his number now, from the day in the coffee shop, and asked if he'd look at the revised security camera placement that the new system was proposing. He'd come in on a Saturday morning, which was the only time that worked for his schedule, and they'd spent 2 hours going through the plans, and at the end of it she'd ordered lunch from the place down the street because neither of them had eaten, and they'd sat at her conference table with sandwiches and gone through the plans again. He'd brought Maya that day, because the babysitter arrangement had fallen through. Maya had sat in the corner of the conference room with a book and her turtle backpack and had periodically looked up at the things on the walls with the evaluating expression that Vanessa was beginning to recognize as a genetic trait. At one point, without preamble, Maya had said, "Is that a real building?" pointing at the architectural rendering on the wall. "It's this building," Vanessa said, "a blueprint." Maya looked at it. "It looks different from inside." "Most things do," Vanessa said. Maya had considered this with apparent seriousness, the way children consider things when an adult has said something that sounds like it might have more to it than the surface, and then she went back to her book. Ethan, across the conference table, had looked at Vanessa with an expression she'd learned to read by now, the slight shift that meant he'd noticed something and was deciding whether to say it. He didn't say it. He went back to the security plans. By December, the once-a-week visits had become regular, and they had stopped being exclusively about security assessments. She didn't examine it too directly for a while, which was a deliberate choice and also not entirely a choice. There were honest reasons to let things be what they were without categorizing them. He was not the kind of person who responded well to things being moved faster than they were ready to move. She was not the kind of person who said things before she understood what she meant by them. These were compatible limitations. What she knew was that she looked forward to Saturdays in a way she hadn't looked forward to a day of the week since she was young enough that the days of the week had distinct characters. That her conference room had, without her particularly authorizing it, acquired a second coffee mug, plain, blue, the kind that ends up in office kitchens without a clear origin story. That when she was working late, which was most evenings, she sometimes found herself thinking about a conversation from the previous Saturday and smiling about it, which was a thing she noticed and then forgot to analyze. Dara, who noticed things in the same comprehensive way she noticed systems failures, said nothing for 4 months, and then said, one afternoon in January, when they were reviewing the Q4 performance reports, "He's good for you." Vanessa looked up from the report. "Not a question," Dara said, and went back to the document. Vanessa went back to the document too. After a moment, she said, "He's complicated." "Most worthwhile things are," Dara said. "He has a 7-year-old daughter. She's 8 now. Her birthday was last month." Vanessa stared at her. "How do you know that?" "She told me." Dara turned a page. "I brought her a book when she was here in November. We talked. She's interesting." A pause. "She has your taste in arguments. She thinks through the counterpoint before she states her position." Vanessa had no immediate response to this, which was an unusual condition for her. "I'm just saying," Dara said, in the tone of someone who is not just saying anything but is saying the precise thing they mean, that complicated and worthwhile are not mutually exclusive categories. She told him in February on a Saturday, in the conference room that had become, without anyone announcing it, something other than a conference room on Saturday mornings. They'd been going through the proposal for the new headquarters security design. Ashcroft Technologies was expanding. The area partnership agreements had accelerated the timeline for a new building, and the security architecture for the new space needed to be different from the ground up rather than retrofitted after the fact. He'd been working on the conceptual framework for 3 weeks, coming in on Saturdays with sketches that were part structural diagram and part something else, the way his thinking operated. Practical, and also several moves ahead of practical. She'd been watching him explain something about the mechanical level access design, his hands moving over the blueprints the way they moved when he was working through something in real time, and she'd thought about what Dara had said, and about the blue coffee mug in the kitchen, and about Maya saying that most things look different from inside, and she'd said, interrupting him mid-sentence, "I want to offer you a position." He stopped. "Director of Corporate Security," she said. "It's a new role. I'm building it from the ground up, which means you'd have actual authority over how it's structured, not just input. It comes with a compensation package that I think is fair, but that you should have your attorney review, and it does not include a firearm unless you want one." She paused. "It does not require you to go anywhere. It's here, in this city, in this building, and the new one we're building. You would never have to be on a plane to a classified location again." He was quiet. "You'd be home by 3:15, she said. "Every day. That's not a perk. That's a structural requirement of the role." He looked at the blueprints, not avoiding her, thinking, which was what his silences were. "This isn't about what happened last August," she said. "I mean, it starts there, in the sense that what I understood from that day is that I need someone who thinks the way you think in this building, in this company, but that's not the whole reason." He looked at her. "I want you here," she said. "That's the full reason. The job is real and the reasoning is sound. But if I'm being completely honest with you, which I should be because you can usually tell when I'm not, I want you here because this company is better when you're in it, and because those are not actually separable from each other, the company and me, even though I've spent 14 months trying to maintain that they are." He held her gaze for a moment. Something in his face was very still. "Vanessa," he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name without the context of a crisis, and it landed differently than she expected, quieter, more specific. "You don't have to answer today," she said. "Take a week. Talk to whoever you talk to about decisions." "I talked to Maya," he said. "Then talk to Maya." A pause. "She already likes you," he said. "I know, I like her too." Vanessa looked at the blueprints on the table. "She told me last month that I think through the counterpoint before I state my position, and that she does that too." Something shifted in his face. The not quite smile, the one she'd cataloged over months of Saturdays. "Where did she get that from?" he said. "I have no idea," Vanessa said. "I'm sure it's a complete mystery." He laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of him rather than chosen, and it changed his face in the way laughter changes faces that don't do it often enough, fully, suddenly, like a different kind of light in the same room. She'd heard it before, a few times over the months, and each time she'd had the same response, which was to want to be the reason for it again as soon as possible. He looked at the blueprints again, and she let him, And outside the window, the city was doing its February thing of being gray and cold and completely indifferent, and the conference room was warm, and the blue coffee mug was in the kitchen, and after a while he said, "The structural requirement, 315. Non-negotiable," she said, "and I have authority over how the security architecture is built. Not input, authority. Your call on the structure, my call on the budget, but we negotiate that. That's fair?" He nodded slowly. A man going through the terms of something that goes beyond the terms being discussed, which they both understood. "I'll talk to Maya." "Talk to Maya," she said. He came back the following Saturday with Maya, which was itself an answer, though he gave her the formal one as well. Yes, he'd take the role. Yes, he understood the scope. Yes, he'd have Mercer's office review the compensation package, which made Mercer briefly confused since he was Vanessa's attorney and not Ethan's, but he reviewed it anyway because that was Mercer. Maya, while her father and Vanessa went through the formal paperwork at the conference table, sat in her usual corner with a new book. She was working through a series about a girl who solved engineering problems, which Vanessa had ordered for her after the blueprints conversation, and which Maya had received with the evaluating look, and then taken home and apparently read twice. And at one point she put the book down and said, without looking up, "Are you going to be here every Saturday now?" Vanessa looked at her. "Probably," she said. "Is that okay?" Maya appeared to give this serious consideration. "You can have the corner with the good window," she said. "The light is better there." Ethan, across the table, did not look up from the paperwork, but Vanessa saw his jaw move in the specific way it moved when he was holding something in that wanted to come out differently. "Thank you," Vanessa said to Maya. "You're welcome," Maya said, and went back to her book. The new Ashcroft Technologies headquarters broke ground in April. The building would be 47 floors, 4 more than the original tower, on a site 3 blocks west. The security architecture was designed from the foundation up, not retrofitted, not assumed, not delegated to people whose loyalty had never been tested. Every access point, every mechanical system, every layer of physical and digital security had been built from a conceptual framework that Ethan had developed over 4 months of Saturday mornings and Tuesday afternoons and several late evenings when Maya was at Mrs. Delgado's, and he'd stayed to work through a problem that didn't want to be solved quickly. The groundbreaking ceremony was a public event, covered by the business press in the way that such events are covered: photographs, brief statements, the ritual of people in good coats standing near construction equipment. Vanessa gave a short speech about what the new building represented, which she kept to 4 minutes because she'd learned over 14 months that 4 minutes was the optimum length for a statement that was supposed to feel like a beginning and not a summary. She said that buildings were not their architecture, that what made a structure worth occupying was not the materials or the design, but what the people inside it chose to do with the space they'd been given. That this company had learned something in the last 8 months about the difference between the building it thought it was and the building it was capable of becoming, and that the new structure being built here was an attempt to house the second version rather than the first. She said that trust, once you understood what it actually required, not the assumption of trust, the performed version, the polite professional extension of benefit of the doubt, was the hardest thing to build correctly and the most important, and that she intended to build it correctly this time, which would mean it would take longer and feel less smooth and probably involve disagreements, but that she'd learned in a maintenance tunnel under her own building at 2 in the afternoon during the worst day of her professional life, that smooth and correct were not the same thing, and that she was no longer interested in confusing them. She did not say who had taught her that. She didn't need to. Ethan was standing at the edge of the gathered group in a coat that was slightly too light for April, watching the crowd the way he watched everything, steadily, comprehensively, with the particular quality of attention that was never entirely off-duty, and that she'd stopped finding unnerving and started finding, somewhere in the middle of the winter, simply part of the full picture of who he was. He caught her eye after the speech. Nothing in his face that was readable to anyone else. Just the slight acknowledgement, the look that had replaced words in the places where words weren't the right tool. She gave the same thing back, and went to talk to the journalists. There's a version of this story that ends with everything resolved into a clear lesson, everything filed neatly away into meaning. The conspiracy exposed, the villains sentenced, the technology launched, the company rebuilt, the man and the woman and the child arranged into a future that looks, from the outside, like the natural conclusion of a hard chapter. That version is not untrue. It just leaves out the texture. The texture is that Holt's sentencing produced a civil suit from Meridian that would take 2 more years to fully resolve, and that Vanessa spent approximately one Tuesday afternoon each month for those 2 years on calls with attorneys going through the specifics of claims she found both infuriating and tedious. The texture is that 3 of the 460 employees left the company in the months after the incident, not from disloyalty, but from the honest human need to be somewhere that didn't carry the weight of a particular event, and that she understood this and it was still hard. The texture is that Ethan woke up at 3 in the morning sometimes, and that this was not a thing that went away cleanly because the context of his life had changed, and that he'd learned, was still learning, the slow and nonlinear process of carrying the past in a way that didn't require him to be unavailable to the present. The texture is that he and Vanessa disagreed regularly because she moved fast and he moved deliberately, and these were not always compatible speeds. And the conference room on Saturday mornings sometimes contained arguments that were not about security architecture, and that this was fine, and that fine was better than smooth. The texture is that Maya, at 8, decided she wanted to learn how buildings worked from the inside, not the architecture part, the mechanical part, the systems part, the way things fit together underneath what you could see, and that Ethan took her through the maintenance tunnel of the old tower one. Saturday, while the building was being decommissioned, and she walked through it with a flashlight and asked questions he answered, and then asked more questions that he didn't immediately know the answer to, which she found satisfying. The texture is that Dara Yuen became Chief Technology Officer, which was the correct outcome and which she received with the same equanimity she brought to everything, and that she and Maya had a standing agreement about book recommendations that neither Vanessa nor Ethan had ever been consulted about. The texture is that Oscar Ruiz was given a formal commendation from the company for his actions during the incident, presented in a small ceremony that he attended in his second shift uniform because he'd come straight from work, and that he shook Vanessa's hand and Ethan's hand and then said to Ethan quietly, "You owe me about 6 months of lunches." And Ethan said, "I know." And they had lunch the following Thursday at the diner 2 blocks from the building, a place that sold a turkey sandwich Oscar had opinions about. What Vanessa understood, in the months after everything, was that the conspiracy had been trying to take something from her, and what it had actually done, in failing, was force a clarity she wouldn't have found any other way. Not the comfortable clarity of a plan going according to plan, the harder kind, the kind that comes from being stripped down to what is actually essential and having to build back up from there, and discovering in the process that the thing you build when you have to is more structurally sound than the thing you build when you're comfortable. She'd built a company once from a position of trying to be what the company needed. She was building it again from a clearer position, knowing what she valued, knowing who she trusted, and what trust actually required, knowing the difference between loyalty that had been tested and loyalty that had only been assumed. And she'd found, not expected, not planned for, not managed into existence, a man who moved through the world at a different speed than she did, and saw things she didn't see, and had a daughter who gave away the best window in the conference room as a gift, which was the most purely generous act Vanessa could remember receiving in recent memory. It was not a perfect thing. It was a real one. On the evening of the new building's groundbreaking, the 3 of them had dinner at a restaurant none of them had been to before, which was Maya's requirement. She had a principle about trying new things that she'd articulated once, to Vanessa's delight, as, "You can't know what's good until you try the unknown versions." The restaurant was good. Maya had pasta. Ethan had something he finished entirely, which was a sign of a good meal by his standards. Vanessa ordered something she'd never had before and found she liked it. Maya talked about the engineering series and about a problem she was working on in school involving the weight distribution of bridges, and about Mrs. Delgado's cat, which had opinions. Ethan listened and asked the right questions, which was his particular gift in those conversations. Not managing them, just being present in them completely. Vanessa listened to both of them and felt something that didn't have a clean name, the kind of feeling that resists naming because naming it would make it smaller than it actually was. The city moved around them outside the restaurant window, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities do, which is carry an enormous number of ordinary and extraordinary things simultaneously without ranking them. Somewhere across town, the old Ashcroft Tower was quiet and dark, already in the early stages of the renovation that would turn it into something else. 3 blocks west, the ground had been turned over for what came next. In the federal system, a case had been made and decided, and the people who had built a careful trap over 7 years were beginning the long process of accounting for it. And in a restaurant on a Wednesday evening in April, a woman who had spent 14 months trying to hold everything together by herself reached across the table to steady Maya's water glass before it tipped, and Ethan caught it at the same moment from the other side, and their hands met above the glass, and Maya, who missed nothing, looked at both of them and then looked back at her pasta with the expression of someone filing information for later use. Vanessa looked at Ethan. He looked back. "Good catch," she said. "You had it," he said. "We both had it," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, the same steady way he held everything, and then he said, "Yeah, we did." Outside, the city went on. Inside, the dinner continued, and that was enough, and it was real, and it was theirs.